And I had no intentions of killing anyone. I would not do that.
As they said, they had it right. A serial killer.
She killed 7 men. Aileen Wuornos, a turned killer, confessed without flinching. After years of trials, outbursts, and no sign of remorse, the court sentenced her to death. On October 9th, 2002, she was led into Florida's death chamber. What followed was not routine. Guards expected silence. Witnesses expected closure. Instead, they got something no one was ready for.
Putting somebody who was raped to death?
Her final meal raised questions. Her final words stopped the room cold. Even the way she looked at the witnesses left people shaken. Those who had seen executions before said this one was different. Chilling, disturbing. What happened in those last moments still sparks debate, not because she died, but because of how she faced it. Here is the true story of Aileen Wuornos' final hours. Let's begin with the first sign of the storm to come. The last dawn. Aileen Wuornos had spent a lifetime defying every label: victim, drifter, murderer. She wears each one like armor. But on the morning of October 9th, 2002, all that defiance met its end. In her death row cell, she wasn't begging for mercy or clinging to life. Instead, she waited with a calm and unreadable expression, as the prison prepared for a final act no one would forget. At 5 a.m., she sat awake on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. Branded America's first female serial killer and nicknamed the Damsel of Death, Wuornos had been convicted a decade earlier for the murder of Richard Mallory, later confessing to 6 more killings.
You killed those men in cold blood?
Yeah, I killed those 7 men in first-degree murder and robbery.
For 10 years, she had sat on death row, and while most inmates clung to life, Aileen had long insisted she was ready to die. To her, the execution wasn't punishment. It was freedom after a lifetime of abuse, violence, and betrayal.
That's why I don't care if I'm executed and leave this planet.
The prison's routines rolled on, but with subtle changes. Guards walked slower, spoke softer, as if already in the presence of someone fading from this world. Breakfast was the same as it had always been: scrambled eggs, toast, and milk. But Aileen had grown distrustful. Earlier that year, she accused staff of contaminating her food with dirt and saliva, even urine, claiming they wanted to break her before the execution. None of it mattered now. With only hours left, she no longer cared. When offered a final meal, steak, lobster, or anything under $20, she refused. Just coffee, she said, black and bitter, as if daring anyone to expect sweetness in her last hours. The cup sat steaming on the tray, untouched, while she stretched across the creaking bed, her expression unreadable. Some believed she was fearless. Others thought it was all a mask. Only Aileen knew the truth. But one thing was undeniable. The tension was building, and she was heading toward a final act that no one in that prison would forget. It wasn't just in her final hours that Aileen defied expectation. She had carried that same defiance through her trial and beyond. When told that the 2 last-minute efforts to halt her execution had failed, one from a Tampa attorney and the other from an Ohio advocacy group, she showed no reaction. Both groups questioned her mental competency, but Aileen herself had no interest in fighting. Earlier that year, she had waived her appeal rights, demanding her execution be sped up, a move that left even her own lawyers questioning her state of mind. Her final appeals attorney, Rag Singhal, had raised concerns just weeks before, prompting Governor Jeb Bush to issue a temporary stay. But after psychiatrists confirmed she fully understood her choices, the stay was lifted. She knew exactly what she was doing, State Attorney John Tanner insisted. Singhal admitted it was a hard day, not because Aileen feared death, but because she welcomed it. For her, the verdict was never defeat. It was the ending she had long been waiting for. But to understand why Aileen greeted the execution chamber like freedom, you have to look back, because the road that led her there began long before the killings. It began in a childhood soaked in trauma, a broken past.
Psychologists sketch a portrait of a damaged person with a lurid history of abuse that began in childhood.
Before Aileen Wuornos ever pulled a trigger, she was a child abandoned, abused, and pushed into survival mode, so how much of her final hours were written in those early scars? As the morning light filtered through the bars, Aileen's untouched coffee sat cooling beside her. That simple refusal of comfort wasn't random. It was a reflection of a lifetime where sweetness was always snatched away. To understand the defiance in her last hours, you have to rewind to the chaos that shaped her. It begins in 1956, Rochester, Michigan. Aileen Carol Wuornos was born to a teenage mother barely holding her own life together. By the time Aileen was 4, her mother was gone, leaving her and her brother in the care of grandparents who treated their home like a battlefield. Her grandfather was a violent alcoholic who lashed out with fists, belts, and unspoken horrors that left marks far deeper than bruises. Her grandmother turned her head, sometimes even blaming Aileen for the abuse, adding betrayal to injury.
If she's in here, I want you to get her out right now, or Charlie's bound to blow her head off.
By 11, Aileen's life had already taken a bad turn. She was stealing, fighting, and setting fires, not out of thrill, but out of rage that no one around her cared to understand. Nights were spent hiding in abandoned cars, eating scraps, and exposed to men who saw her desperation as an opportunity. At 13, she became pregnant, likely by someone who should have protected her. The baby was taken from her, placed for adoption, but the loss never left. It stayed with her like a ghost she couldn't shake.
By 13, and was pregnant, and when her grandfather kicked her out of home, Lee Wuornos' life on the road began.
Living on the streets hardened her fast, and by 15, she was selling her body just to eat, carrying a knife to remind the world she wasn't helpless anymore. By then, the trust she had in the world and her immediate environment was broken. Seeking trust elsewhere, she married an older man in 1976. He had a house, a pension, and the kind of steady routine she had never known. For a brief moment, she thought she had found safety, but it collapsed fast. He found out about her past, arrests, fights, theft, and time spent living in the woods. His reaction wasn't compassion, it was fear and disgust. Just weeks after the wedding, he filed for a restraining order, claiming she had hit him with his own cane. The marriage was over almost as fast as it began, and Aileen was left humiliated and enraged. Then it got worse. That same year, her brother Keith, the only person in her life who had ever truly been there, was diagnosed with cancer. He deteriorated fast. There was no time to process it, no time to prepare. One visit, he was talking. Not long after, he was in a hospital bed, barely able to speak. She watched him fade. She held his hand and begged him not to go. When he died, something in her snapped. There were no other family members. Keith was it. After his funeral, Aileen locked herself in a room, screamed into pillows until her voice broke, and punched the walls until her knuckles bled. She cried until she couldn't breathe. Then she stopped crying completely. There was no one left to call, no one left to understand her. The pain became something else, hard, cold, and permanent. With no one left to turn to, Aileen drifted back to the streets. The alleys, the bars, the highways, they became her home again. After Keith's death, she received a $10,000 life insurance payout. She burned through it fast on a car, booze, and motel rooms. Within weeks, it was gone. She slipped deeper into prostitution, trading her body to survive, every encounter carving away at what little innocence she had left. But soon, survival wasn't enough. The rage that had followed her since childhood was about to erupt. and it would leave a trail of bodies across Florida's highways. The highway murders. Life on Florida's highways was a gamble Aileen Wuornos played every night. Prostitution wasn't just degrading, it was dangerous. Every stranger who pulled over could be a client, an abuser, or a killer. She carried a .22 caliber pistol under her jacket, convinced it was the only thing standing between her and another attack.
I want to take your car. Think I'm stupid enough to get back into a car with you when there's a...
But in late 1989, the danger shifted. Aileen wasn't just surviving anymore. She was quietly drifting into someone she wasn't from the beginning. Her first victim was Richard Mallory, a 51-year-old electronics store owner with a history of violence against women. In November 1989, she got into his car, rode with him into the woods, and when the night turned violent, she pulled her pistol and fired. She would later swear it was self-defense, that Mallory tried to take advantage of her.
By the time of her trial, Lee was pleading self-defense.
She said she'd do anything for you, didn't she?
Yes, she did.
After Mallory's body was found, the police had nothing. No witnesses, no suspect, no car. Just a corpse left in the woods full of bullet holes. Aileen didn't lay low. She didn't panic. She went right back to the highway like it never happened. Same roads, same routine, same pistol. She drove Mallory's car for days, used his ID when she needed it, pawned his belongings under fake names, and moved on like it was business as usual. No one stopped her. No one questioned her. The police didn't even know her name. The first man was dead, and Aileen Wuornos had learned one thing: left fewer problems than trusting. Over the next year, bodies began to appear across Florida's highways. David Spears, a construction worker, was shot 6 times and left naked in the dust. Charles Carskadden, a rodeo worker, was dumped like cargo. Troy Burris, a delivery driver, never finished his route. Charles Humphreys, a retired Air Force officer and former police chief, was executed and left by the roadside. Peter Seams, a missionary, vanished. His body never recovered, only his blood-stained car abandoned. And Walter Antonio, a trucker, was shot 6 times and left to rot in the woods. 7 men in total, all killed between 1989 and 1990. As time passed, the murders grew harder to explain as the victims' profiles shifted from dangerous men to ordinary workers who never made it home. By 1990, Florida was gripped with fear. The idea of a female serial killer was almost unheard of, and the spectacle around Aileen only grew as the bodies mounted. The police chase went on for years until finally they found her. The arrest.
Lee was prepared for anything but the 6 Florida police officers who arrested her.
As the years passed, Aileen grew reckless. After each killing, the weight of what she had done didn't crush her, it hardened her. Her hands no longer trembled. Her eyes stopped looking back. She felt untouchable. But the trail she left behind was anything but invisible. The break came when police recovered Richard Mallory's stolen car. Inside were fingerprints. Her final walk. But they didn't know her by that name yet. She had used a dozen aliases. The key was tracing the pawn shop receipts where she had sold items taken from her victims. Each slip required a thumbprint, and those thumbprints all matched that of Aileen. Aileen had a girlfriend, Tyria Moore, and the police found her first. Tyria was scared. She had fled Florida after the murders started making headlines. When detectives tracked her down in Pennsylvania, they didn't arrest her. Instead, they offered a deal.
2 more death row. How many times you gotta kill me? You know, I mean, this is bullshit.
Cooperate or go down with Aileen. Tyria agreed. The plan was cruel but effective. The police flew her back to Florida. They wired her up and put her in a motel. Then they had her call Aileen. Over and over, Tyria begged Aileen to help her. She sobbed. She told her the police were threatening her, that she was scared, that she needed Aileen to confess and protect her. The calls went on for days. and slowly they broke Aileen down. She never outright admitted to the murders over the phone, but she said enough. She told Tyria she would do anything to keep her safe. That's when the cops moved in. On January 9th, 1991, Aileen stepped outside a bar in Port Orange, Florida. She was chain-smoking and drunk. She never saw the arrest coming. Undercover officers surrounded her. They had been watching her for days. They knew exactly who she was. She didn't run. She didn't scream. Her shoulders slumped forward like she already knew this moment had been coming for years. She looked at the ground, took one last drag from her cigarette and muttered, "I knew this was gonna happen." Then they cuffed her and took her away. And now, years later, as she sat before that untouched cup of coffee on the morning of her execution, the same highway murders that made her infamous were the ones pulling her toward the needle. But before that final act, Aileen wasn't finished. She still had a story to tell, one that forced the world to ask, was she a woman pushed past her breaking point? Or just a cold-blooded killer who hid behind the mask of survival? The final interview. At 3 p.m. on October 7th, 2002, just 2 days before her execution, Aileen Wuornos sat down with filmmaker Nick Broomfield for what would be her last recorded interview. What began with a smile would soon unravel into accusations of torture, conspiracy, and a final outburst that shook everyone who watched.
Execution chamber and be executed under the devil. I have to come clean and cleanse my spirit in the name of Jesus Christ.
When the camera began to roll, she greeted him with a smile, tugged at her orange prison shirt, and joked for a brief moment. It almost seemed like she was relaxed. Broomfield asked how she was holding up in prison. She admitted life was okay, but added bluntly, "Some staff don't like you." When asked if she had made friends, she shook her head. "No, I stick to myself. I don't even care about going outdoors. There's nothing out there. I don't smoke anymore. I just stay in the cell." She explained her routine. Watching TV, reading the Bible, writing letters to her friend Dawn, and thinking about her past. "I'm preparing for my death, getting all the tears out of me so I won't cry," she said. "I don't want to be in the execution chamber crying my eyes out, and I'm not going to," she added. But the calm didn't last. As the conversation shifted, Aileen's tone darkened and her words turned sharp. She claimed she had been tortured in prison. They had the intercom on in the room and they kept lying that it wasn't on. "They were using sonic pressure on my head since 1997, she told Broomfield. Her voice rose as she described being poisoned. "A lot of food trays were attempted murder. I had to wash all my food off. One day I didn't and I was sick for 3 weeks and almost died," she said. Then came the most chilling moment. She leaned forward and made an accusation that stunned even Broomfield. In her words, she said, "Let them know that I know the cops knew who I was after Richard Mallory died. I left prints everywhere and they covered them up. They let me kill the rest of those guys to turn me into a serial killer." The outburst ended with venom.
You killed 7 men, 7 strangers. Does that not make you a serial killer?
So I didn't kill him every day, did I?
She slammed society itself, spitting fury at the camera. "You sabotaged my ass, society." Her middle finger shot up, her eyes wild, as if she was putting the whole world on trial one last time. This was no plea for mercy. It was her final statement, part confession, part conspiracy, and pure rage. But that final storm of anger raised a deeper question. Was Aileen Wuornos speaking with clarity, or had her mind already slipped beyond reason? The outburst was so raw, so unhinged, that the state could no longer ignore it. Before strapping her to the gurney, psychiatrists would have to decide if she was truly sane enough to die. The mental check. On October 8th, 2002, just 1 day before her execution, Aileen Wuornos sat across from 3 court-appointed psychiatrists. Their job was simple but decisive: determine whether she was mentally competent to be put to death.
Same attorney. also represented the interests of Tyria Moore in these discussions.
Made up in their mind.
Florida law required her to understand both the reason for her sentence and the reality of her impending execution. If she couldn't, the state would be forced to halt the process and possibly defer it. This wasn't just a conversation, it was the final obstacle between Wuornos and the needle. The doctors began with direct questions. Do you know why you're here? Do you know what will happen tomorrow? Aileen didn't hesitate. Her answers were firm, almost defiant. She acknowledged her crimes, recognized the punishment, and made it clear she was ready to face it. But the shadow of her final interview just a day earlier still hung in the air. Her talk of poisoned food, sonic pressure, and police conspiracies painted a picture of paranoia that couldn't be ignored. Was this a woman unraveling, or was she controlling the narrative on her own terms? For nearly an hour, the psychiatrists pressed harder, looking for signs of confusion or delusion. Aileen held steady. She spoke of meeting God, of being ready to leave behind a life she had long called unbearable. Troubled or not, she understood what was coming, and under the law, that was enough. By the end of the session, the verdict was unanimous. Aileen Wuornos was competent to die. The doctors cleared the path for her execution, but Aileen wasn't finished. Her final act would leave the world reeling. The strange calm. It was the strangest sight of all. With only hours left, Aileen Wuornos wasn't raging, she wasn't shouting, she was humming. Soft gospel notes slipped out of her cell, trembling but steady like a woman singing herself into the unknown. By noon on October 9th, 2002, the frenzy outside Florida State Prison had become background noise. Inside her gray concrete box, everything was still. The air smelled of old paint and damp stone. Her coffee sat untouched and cold, and her orange jumpsuit crumpled around her on a thin mattress. For the first time in days, the woman once called a storm was silent. They handed her a towel and a washcloth, a small courtesy before the inevitable. She took them without a word. There were no visitors, no last-minute embraces. Tyria Moore, the lover who testified against her, was gone, hidden in another life. Arlene Prala, the woman who once promised salvation, was nowhere to be found. Everyone she had clung to had vanished, and yet she seemed calm. She spoke of angels, of meeting God, her tone a strange mix of faith and defiance. It was impossible to tell whether she was finding peace or simply masking fear. But peace never lasts long on death row. As the clock pushed past 7 a.m., the rhythm of boots grew louder in the hallway. Guards were moving faster now, and the air became thick with urgency. The execution chamber was waiting. Aileen's calm was unsettling, but the real storm was about to begin. The morning of October 9th, 2002 began with a routine procedure inside Florida State Prison, but nothing about it felt ordinary. Aileen Wuornos was about to die.
Death set for about 90 minutes from now. 7's Patrick Frazier is live in Rayford as her sentence is about to be carried out.
Shortly before 8 a.m., a prison psychologist visited her cell. They spoke briefly. She was reminded that she had the right to a final phone call, but she declined. She didn't want to speak to anyone. By then, it seemed she had already made her peace. Her only request that morning had been a cup of black coffee, no meal, no cigarette, nothing else. At exactly 8:30 a.m., the guards arrived. 4 of them, 2 on each side, flanking her as she stepped out for the last time. This part of the procedure was known as the gauntlet, the condemned prisoner's final walk to the execution chamber. By policy, no shackles are used. The prisoner must walk freely. Most falter, some weep, but Aileen didn't, just like she promised Broomfield. Her orange prison uniform hung loosely on her frame, her hair damp from a quick wash, but her stride was steady. There was no hesitation or visible trembling of hands, just a faint grin curling at the edge of her lips, strange, unsettling, impossible to read. The hall was silent except for the shuffle of boots on the polished floor. No clanging keys, no distant shouts from other inmates. The air smelled of bleach. At one point, she passed a narrow window, sunlight spilling across the floor, but her eyes stayed locked on the steel door at the end.
Because there's only about 1% chance that person can get off death row. And I come to realize that that is actually true.
Behind it was the chamber where her life would end. A few minutes before 9 a.m., she entered. The staff guided her onto the gurney, securing her wrists and ankles with straps. She accepted a sip of water, refused a cigarette, and lay still as the preparations began. A pamphlet near the table explained the chemicals that would soon flow through her veins. The room was tense, every movement deliberate. Then came the final question. Did she have any last words? What Aileen said next stunned everyone in the chamber. Share this with friends who follow true crime. You'll want them with you when we uncover the shocking last words she left behind. The chilling promise. The chamber was silent, every eye locked on Aileen Wuornos as she prepared to speak her last words. But instead of a goodbye, she gave something far more unsettling, a cryptic vow that left the witnesses frozen, unsure if they'd just heard madness, mockery, or prophecy.
You know, serial killers are in this thrill killing jazz. I was into the robbing, just and eliminate a witness.
The drugs were already sliding through Aileen Wuornos's veins, and the chamber had gone deathly quiet. Behind the glass, reporters clutched notepads, victims' families stared with unblinking eyes, and even the spiritual advisors seemed frozen. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioner buzzing like a fly in a coffin. At 9:38 a.m., the warden leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. Any final words? Every head tilted forward. The room waited for the woman branded the damsel of death to speak. Aileen's lips parted, her gaze fixed on the ceiling, and then her voice cut through the silence with words no one expected.
See my well-being until my execution. Maybe that would keep things kind of in line because there's a lot of illegalness going on.
Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the rock and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back. The chamber froze. Sailing with the rock? Independence Day? A mothership? Each phrase dropped like a stone in water, sending ripples of shock through the witnesses. Some exchanged uneasy glances, others gripped the edge of their seats. Was this the rant of a fractured mind? A last jab at the world that condemned her? Or did Aileen truly believe she'd return arm in arm with God, carried on some cosmic ship? Her words carried defiance, but also a strange conviction, like she was mocking death while promising something beyond it. Reporters scribbled frantically, knowing these bizarre words would hit headlines by morning. Her eyelids began to sag as the sedative pulled her under, but her words didn't fade. They hung in the chamber like smoke, a chilling promise no one could shake. The execution. Strapped to the gurney, Aileen Wuornos finally faced the end, and her eyes told a story no one could quite read. The chamber door slammed shut, and the countdown began. Behind the glass, 32 witnesses leaned forward, waiting for the moment Florida would end the life of America's most infamous female serial killer. A nurse inserted the IV into her arm, the tubes already primed with the 3-drug sequence: sedative, paralytic, and finally potassium chloride to stop her heart. Florida law demanded every step be documented, every dose measured, every second logged. There was no room for error. Behind thick glass were 2 spiritual advisors, members of the press and relatives of her victims. They could see her, but she could not see them. The chamber was still, the only sound the faint hum of the air system. A guard explained the process aloud, his voice flat, almost mechanical.
There's no way, and nobody should go in that execution chamber dying on a hope for a lie.
At the warden's signal, the IV began to drip. The sedative hit fast as Aileen's eyes flickered, then rolled shut. Her chest rose unevenly before slowing as the paralytic froze her body. Seconds later, the potassium chloride finished the work. At 9:47 a.m., her heart stopped. A doctor entered, checked her vitals, and pronounced her dead. The room stayed silent. Witnesses scribbled notes, some stiff in their seats, others clutching tissues, while prison staff moved quickly and without ceremony. The fourth was unhooked. A sheet was pulled over her body. She was wheeled out, logged, and sent to the county medical examiner for the required autopsy. The cause of death was confirmed to be lethal injection. Her body was then cremated. The ashes were sealed in an urn and returned to Rochester, Michigan. As she requested, they were scattered beneath a tree. After decades of violence, fear, and death, the woman once branded the damsel of death vanished quietly into the earth. But even with her body reduced to ashes, Aileen Wuornos refused to fade. Her chilling final words ensured she would not be remembered with silence, but with a promise that left the world unsettled. The aftermath, monster or victim? After Aileen's death, questions arose. Was she a ruthless predator who lured men to their deaths, or a broken woman molded by years of abuse and neglect? That single question turned her into a global obsession.
And I cannot go in the execution chamber and be executed under the devil.
Her story spread across news outlets, books, and documentaries. In 1992, Nick Broomfield's documentary Aileen Wuornos, The Selling of a Serial Killer, exposed how even police and her own lawyer profited from her case, raising questions about fairness. Meanwhile, her ex-girlfriend Tyra Moore, once the closest person in her life, had gone silent. Condemned by some as a traitor for helping police, defended by others as someone who simply wanted to avoid prison herself. Hollywood amplified her reach further. In 2003, Monster premiered with Charlize Theron's chilling portrayal winning an Oscar and pulling millions into Wuornos's fractured world. Letters published in Dear Dawn revealed her paranoia, anger, and fragile faith, offering a voice rawer than any headline. Through it all, her story forced society to confront uncomfortable questions about women who kill, about mental illness, and about whether the death penalty delivers justice or just silence. In the end, her ashes were scattered beneath a tree in Michigan, a quiet ending to a life lived in chaos. And now we will turn it over to you. What do you think, monster, victim, or both? Let us know in the comment section.